And that right there is the real reason why they didn't want him in the show, because they couldn't stand the idea of a male character teaching a woman anything of value, because it would violate the rules of modern writing, which have apparently decided that men are dumb, they don't know anything of value, and they have nothing to teach anyone. And trust me, once you realise that's the thinking behind so much of modern movie making, well, you're never going to be able to unsee it.
Oh boy. This will be interesting. So the Critical Drinker recently released a video titled Why Modern Movies Suck, They Hate Men, Part 1, and it's not very good. I'd even go as far as to say that it's pretty dishonest in its attempt to paint modern Hollywood as male-hating, but we'll of course get into this throughout the video. Now we recently went over this video over on the Fandom Initiative, and if you want more content covering these anti-woke channels, then go check out that channel along with actual fandom, organized chaos, and pop counterculture. However, as we went over the poor argumentation and lack of solid evidence in his video, I realized that this needs to be brought to more people's attention, and perhaps be condensed into a smaller video, so that's what I'm here to do. But let's just get into it because we have a lot to get through. So subscribe to the channel if you want more, check out my memberships, and let's start with the opening to this video.
Men, don't you just hate them all? Well, if you happen to be a creative working in Hollywood today, then the answer is probably yes. Either because you genuinely believe it, or because you think it's what you're expected to say these days just to get hired.
Alright, I know he's probably joking here, but I just want to clarify in case some of his audience actually believe that this is true. You don't have to hate men to get a job in Hollywood. That is not an expectation there is, and you really wouldn't make it very far in the industry if you openly said that you hate men. If anyone tells you this and is serious, then you have permission to punch them in the face, because they're lying to you. But what a way to start a video, really sets the tone.
But whatever the reason, there's been a bit of a change in the past few years in how men are portrayed on screen, and here's a hint, it hasn't been a good one. Hard as it may be to believe now, there was a time when we were practically spoiled for choice when it came to cool, awesome, aspirational male heroes on the big and the small screen. Whether they were scrappy underdogs who had to rise to the challenge, or brave adventurers risking life and limb for fortune and glory, or hard-bitten cops taking on the criminal underbelly of society, they were a whole generation of men who kicked ass, triumphed against the odds and saved the day, and usually looked pretty cool doing it. That time, however, has passed.
Men who triumph against all odds and save the day? That's still basically every action movie being made nowadays. Just looking at last year, most of the top grossing movies all had men triumphing against the odds while looking awesome. Top Gun Maverick was the highest grossing movie last year. And not just that, but we also had movies like Avatar, Multiverse of Madness, Jurassic Park Dominion, The Batman, Thor Love and Thunder, Black Adam, Uncharted, Sonic the Hedgehog,
Puss in Boots.
All movies with male leads who, in your words, kicked ass, triumphed against the odds, and saved the day. Oh, so his editing is incredibly lazy. And listen, some of my videos are lazily edited too. Sometimes that's just not the main focus when you want to share your opinions with other people. But the clips he shows in the background of his video, at the very least, shouldn't contradict what he's saying. He claims that we used to be spoiled for cool, awesome, aspirational male heroes, which insinuates that we don't have many of those characters nowadays. But the clips in the background are showing Captain America, Iron Man, and Deadpool, all heroes that have been on the big screen within the past decade. All heroes who fit your description of the cool, awesome, aspirational male heroes that we lack nowadays. This lazy editing on your part shows that your arguments are baseless, but you don't care because you know your viewers gobble it up whenever you preach to them about how men are being cast aside by the woke mob.
The traditional heroic male lead that was pretty much the bedrock foundation of cinema for almost 100 years is apparently no longer a viable commodity in entertainment today. They're too dated, too toxic, too dangerous to put into the limelight, and so they've been replaced with more acceptable alternatives.
Acceptable alternatives? What does this even mean? I guess you're trying to show modern Hollywood actors to be soft and feminine, but so what? You aren't even correct. Robert Pattinson was probably the most violent and brutal Batman we've had to date, and Paul from Dune is pretty badass. And even if you were to have a point here, which again you don't really, because they are quote traditional heroic male leads, that's still just 3 actors out of how many actors in Hollywood who prove you wrong. People who fit your descriptions of the typical heroic male lead. You also talk about ads being made to show men as incompetent, when all ads are really trying to do is just to get you to buy their stupid product. Commercials on the TV couldn't care less about any progressive or social message. If they can use feminism to make money, then they'll do that. If they can make money by shitting on feminism, then they'll do that too. Trying to find ethics and morals in advertisements is a lost cause. This whole section is just weird and vague. However, now we finally get to the meat of the video. The first trope that Hollywood uses to oppress men. The death of the stoic man.
Trope number 1. The death of the stoic man. Pick out any random selection of mainstream movies that are more than 10 or 15 years old and give them a watch. Now pay particular attention to the men in those movies. Watch how they act, how they communicate with each other, the pace and tone and tempo of their conversations. Watch how they carry themselves. Think about the subtle shifts of power and dominance as their scenes progress. The use of pauses and facial expressions and eye contact to clue the audience in on who's dictating the pace of the conversation. Do this and you'll probably begin to pick up on a few things, like the fact that men in older movies are generally able to convey a lot more by saying less.
This is so fucking vague, and he doesn't give examples. He says things like notice how, but then doesn't give the examples. He just gives some basic ass instructions and tells you to go do his job as a video essayist for him. He also shoots himself in the foot when he says pick any movie older than 10 to 15 years, because there are plenty of examples of scenes from within this period that don't have a lot of dialogue. Scenes where the facial expressions and eye contact of the characters show who's dictating the conversation. Like, what's he trying to say? This is just good acting he's describing. And scenes where there's not a lot of dialogue. I'm so glad you finally learned about show, don't tell. I just think you learned the wrong lesson from it.
They're generally more reserved and project a kind of quiet confidence. They're less prone to big emotional outbursts or energetic displays of high-strung verbal diarrhea. They spend less time talking about themselves and how things make them feel, and more time grappling with whatever problem or issue is actually at hand. When they decide to show aggression, it's generally controlled and carefully measured and deployed at just the right moment for maximum impact. They're less likely to admit to personal weaknesses, insecurity and emotional fragility, or complain about physical discomfort and danger. In writing terms, this is what we refer to as stoicism.
First of all, he's basically just describing a perfect person who has little to no flaws, which in my opinion would make for an incredibly bland character. But hey, we all like different things. However, there is a problem with wanting men to just be portrayed as stoic, but not really stoic men who don't show emotion, who bottle it up, and when they finally show emotion, they only have one, that being aggression, as well as not wanting to admit to personal failures, insecurities, and weaknesses. I'll get into this later, but this really isn't a healthy mindset for people to look up to, because it's really quite damaging for the individual and their relationships. I mean, most of the characters he's showing here are quite fucking miserable, but yeah, sure, let's go around glorifying it. But just to be clear, it's not a bad thing to be emotionally reserved and not break down all the time, but it's really not healthy to bottle up emotions and try to be like these characters who really aren't role models. But again, we'll get into this later.
A stoic character is one that's generally reserved and emotionally distant, the kind of person who bears their troubles and discomforts without too much complaining. It's a character type most commonly associated with traditional ideas of masculine behaviour. Why? Because that's how men generally act around each other. Now take a look at men in mainstream movies today, and pay attention to the same aspects that you looked at before. I can pretty much guarantee you're going to notice a big difference between the two. The men in movies and TV shows now tend to come across as annoyingly talkative and expressive, reacting emotionally to what other people say and do, instead of coolly observing and keeping their own feelings in check.
Now this is the first section where his editing goes from just lazy to downright dishonest. Here he's talking about stoicism and how movies don't portray men anymore who are emotionally reserved and distant, who don't complain, and generally just more traditional pictures of masculinity. And he shows Jaskier from The Witcher as an example that modern Hollywood isn't portraying men like this anymore. The only problem is that in this very same frame, Geralt of fucking Rivia can be seen, who literally fits all of your criteria for a masculine and emotionally reserved man. This editing is dishonest, it's nitpicky, and it's done this way to try and prove a point that there isn't really any evidence for. He also shows this random dude from Numenor rather than show, for example, Elendil, who's again a great example of a stoic and emotionally reserved man. You're literally just showing this random dude because it fits your narrative, and you purposefully cut out any other piece of information from the same shows that could prove you wrong. It's just plain deceitful. I'm just going to play this clip from The Amazing Atheist's video on The Critical Drinker, because I honestly couldn't have said it better myself.
Tell me, when you make content that you know is stupid, and you know that you're just making it to appease idiots, how do you silence that little voice in the back of your head that says, like, you're a piece of shit? Why are you doing this, Bobby? Why are you such a piece of shit, Bobby? I'm assuming your name is Bobby. I've decided that. How do you suppress that little voice? Because, man, you are cleaning up with this grift, bro. I don't know. Just lie to them. Just be like, yeah, there's no pictures about heroic men saving the day anymore. I mean, except, most movies. But,
Wait, damn, and for what shit about?
And this is important because here's a little secret for you, boys and girls. The ability to just shut the fuck up for a minute and let an uncomfortable silence stretch out before you is a pretty powerful weapon when it comes to tense conversations, because you're making it clear that you don't care much whether the other person expects a response. You'll speak to them when you're goddamn good and ready.
What does this even mean? Because yes, some people know how to use silence to their advantage, and we have wonderful modern characters like Mike Ehrmantraut and Gus Fring as examples. But like, not a lot of people can do this very effectively in real life. You think your average man just shuts up during tense conversations? No. Like most people, we tend to react emotionally in tense and serious situations. Also, you're talking about the character trait of patience, which last time I heard, doesn't really belong to a specific gender. But I guess you'll elaborate on your point when you're goddamn good and ready.
Male characters today, however, mirror whatever they see and hear instead of imposing their own pace and tone on the conversation. They seem uncomfortable with the idea of protracted silence and feel the need to constantly talk to fill the gaps. Any real action that they take has to be undercut by ironic self-deprecating humour, which instead of being funny, just makes them come across as insecure and lacking the confidence of their own convictions.
These are examples of comedic or light-hearted moments, not serious dramatic moments like the ones you're showing off of older movies. And you're also showing the more light-hearted characters. Ant-Man is a bit awkward in this situation and he makes jokes, but like Steve, Bucky, and Sam are not. And you show this random dude losing to Galadriel as some sort of example rather than the examples from that very same show of men who are way more calm and collected. And yes, this scene from Heat between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, which is one of the most iconic scenes of all time, is exactly the same situation as this moment from Thor Ragnarok, a comedy Marvel movie. These are just not the same thing. You're not making fair comparisons. There are so many movies being made nowadays that aren't quirky superhero movies, where you only want to focus on the big blockbusters, and during this movie, Thor is even a badass. But oh no, wait, I forgot, you don't like this movie because a couple of women being involved makes you feel small.
At least until you started to look a bit deeper and realised that he basically spends the whole movie playing second fiddle to strong female character and strong female antagonist and getting his ass kicked by both.
Listen, I don't even know why I'm engaging with these dumb arguments. They aren't substantiated in the slightest. And perhaps this audience will say that the clips he shows in the background aren't to be taken that seriously, but like, he doesn't give any other examples, so I'm kind of being charitable here and assuming he's even making an argument to begin with.
There seems to be this weird belief that stoic personalities are inherently dangerous and unhealthy, like men who don't constantly express their every thought and feeling are nothing but fountains of repressed rage and raw emotion, that taking decisive action and wanting to assert control over a tense situation is somehow fundamentally wrong.
Alright, this is an important point to bring up when it comes to the topic of men. The argument is not that men should be hyper emotional and cry about every little issue that comes up, or that it's fundamentally wrong to try and assert control over a tense situation, not even in the slightest, and that's a straw man of the general argument against harmful male stereotypes. Men nowadays aren't struggling because feminists aren't allowing them to be men. No, men are struggling as they always have, due to growing up with rigid rules for what they should be. Men shouldn't show emotion, a man shouldn't cry if he needs to, men don't talk to other men about their feelings. I would know this because I am a man. It can be fucking lonely, not because women are oppressing us, that's a whiny excuse, rather because the hyper-masculine culture that has persisted for centuries forces men to suffer in silence. A lot of men don't have close friends or relationships, they suffer from mental health issues, but are far less likely than women to seek out help, because again, they think this makes them weak, because that's what they've been told. Young men also commit suicide at an alarmingly high rate. which needs to be addressed. And you don't address these issues by feeding them lies about how it's the fault of Hollywood and wokeness that they feel so marginalized. No, a good place to start is to try and make people aware that the patriarchal systems that have held down women for so long also negatively affect men who aren't at the top. And listen to me carefully here, I'm not saying that the drinker is as bad as someone like Andrew Tate or Sneeko. No, not at all. But he's playing a part in propagating this harmful culture by telling young men that the reasons they're not happy is because feminism and wokeness is preventing them from unfolding themselves as traditional men, when in reality it's these rigid traditional values regarding men and women that have caused so many of the problems we're experiencing today. I'll link a couple of videos down below that go into way more depth with these issues than I have the time to do now, but the argument has never been that you can't follow more traditional stereotypes for being a man, but rather that you should be aware of the harmful aspects of these tropes, as well as the positive aspects that are making you follow them in the first place. However, let's move on.
And yeah, that seems to be what we're being force-fed in our fictional characters these days. Jesus, no wonder cinemas are having their worst years in fucking decades.
Like I mentioned in my Dave Cullen video, there's a very simple reason for the low box office numbers, and it's the pandemic. It's not because of wokeness or that Hollywood is anti-male, it's because of the pandemic, and cinema has not yet recovered, but it's slowly getting there. TV shows are also getting woker by the day according to you guys, but streaming has boomed in the past couple of years. But then he moves on to the second trope, the deconstructed hero. I'm sure this will be insightful.
Trope number 2, the deconstructed hero. Remember all those awesome, heroic male characters that you liked when you were growing up? Well, forget about them because they were never actually heroes in the first place, and modern Hollywood is determined to prove it to you. And truly, what more quintessential example could I possibly give to start things off than Luke Skywalker, who went from one of the most iconic and beloved heroes in all of cinema to a sad, broken, miserable and forlorn man, living alone on a windswept island and just running out the clock until he could eventually die. Truly, Rian Johnson understood exactly what he was doing with this one. He performed the most epic character assassination of all time, determined to kill not just the man, but his legacy along with him.
This is a complete misrepresentation of Luke in The Last Jedi. I don't care if you don't like Luke by the end of this movie. You can think the way he dies is weak and pathetic, but this is dishonest as hell. You're basing your whole argument off of where Luke is at the beginning of the story, not where he ends up, which is the complete opposite. Yes, at the beginning of the movie, Luke is cynical, depressed, and feeling shame due to his own failure, but by the end of the movie, he's hopeful, he's heroic, and he's badass. This movie shows our favorite hero losing his way, but then refinding it and rising to the occasion, and being the hero we knew he always was. Do you just not want our heroes to struggle? Do you not want them to develop in any meaningful ways? Would it have been better in your eyes if he was just Grandmaster Luke, ready to save the day, and that was it? But listen, the quality of Luke in this movie is still utterly irrelevant, and I want to stress that. Hate the way Rian Johnson portrayed Luke all you want, but the critical drinker is purposefully misrepresenting Luke's character in this movie just to fit his argument, without engaging with reality. This complete lack of care towards representing the character he's commentating on should really raise eyebrows for anyone who claims to love media analysis, because this is dishonest.
Or how about Rocky Balboa, the ultimate underdog and symbol of scrappy, determined optimism? A man who fought his way to the top through sheer determination and willpower, taking down men bigger and stronger than himself through sheer refusal to give up. Then you get to something like Creed, where he's portrayed as a sad, lonely old man who's given up on life. A man who isn't even willing to go through life-saving cancer treatment because he just doesn't care about living anymore.
He's an old man with cancer who's lost his wife. Loneliness and wanting to die is extremely common among older men, especially widows. It's a serious thing affecting millions of men around the world, but oh no, you don't care about that. You just want to see badass men with big toned and sweaty bodies. Don't worry, I get it. But also, Rocky loses a lot throughout his movies. He feels down a lot, but he builds himself back up, just like he does in Creed, where he's an old man who has lost his wife and has cancer. It's the same fucking story. He's just an old man now, so it's not about boxing for him anymore. Now, I don't know anything about Star Trek, which I got reprimanded for the other day, but if you watch our video over on the Fandom Initiative in this timestamp, then you can see Dane's reaction to it. Again, the drinker's argument just falls apart. I'll also only briefly mention Zack Snyder, because his films should really all fit within Drinker's ideal for male-positive movies, and they all loved him until he called out geeks and gamers. Their list of friends really is growing thinner by the day.
Or perhaps James Bond, surely the ultimate ultimate man's man. A tough, cold, ruthless man of action who can handle any threat and seduce any woman with ease. But oh no, we can't allow harmful stereotypes like that to persist in the current era of Hollywood. We have to make him sad and pouty and hung up on a woman who died like 4 movies ago. And when he tries to flirt with women now, it becomes a point of awkward comedy because gosh darn it, why on earth would they be attracted to a man like him? Yep, that's what I want. I want to be laughing at James Bond.
Daniel Craig is probably the most stoic, ruthless, and badass James Bond we've ever had, and no one can say otherwise. And also, regarding the point about James Bond being held up on a girl, which makes him a pouty and sad beta male, Organized Chaos, your good friend.
Mr. Lucas says, hey everyone, I hope you had a good Christmas. Hey Muller, you should debate some of your haters on EFAP. It would be hilarious. Bring Organized Chaos on.
I barely
Made a solid point about this.
James Bond.
Okay, so the James Bond example was outrageously wrong because number one, even the Daniel Craig James Bond absolutely is the stoic man he's talking about. A lot of the toxicity that was Bond in the early days was absolutely part of the Daniel Craig James Bond. Daniel Craig talked about how he didn't even like that aspect. That's why he didn't like playing the character. Yeah, another point he brings up is how James Bond was hung up on Eva Green's character. I can't think of her name. Vesper. He was hung up on Vesper Lynn for a few years. Now, Mikey J, George Lazenby literally cried at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So, you guys know what happened at the end of that movie?
Oh yeah, his wife died, right? They just got married.
He got married, and his wife died. Do you want to know the last time that was mentioned in the James Bond film franchise? And his wife died on Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1969 movie. The last time it was mentioned was in 1989, License to Kill. So 20 years right
Get
there
over it.
of pining over a woman. What a fucking beta male move.
And it's also a plotline straight from the books where he becomes a washed-up alcoholic and is almost fired by M. Again, these arguments are just not good. Now, this section has been about our favorite characters being ruined, but he hasn't really shown any solid evidence that our heroes have indeed been ruined. Rather, just that they've been given different and new interpretations. You can still find your burly, quiet men in movies nowadays, but there is simply just more variation now. And remember that, because that will be important at the end. Just you wait. But let's move on to trope number 3. Men are just dumb, I guess.
Trope number 3. Men are just dumb, I guess. One of the things that really seems to have taken hold in modern entertainment is the idea that the smartest person in the room can never possibly be a man. Whether it's comically brain-dead morons like the Red Guardian from Black Widow, whose one and only character trait is that he could punch things really hard, well, except when he has to actually fight someone important, or supposedly ruthless military leaders like General Hux getting suckered in and provoked into a rage by a "your mum" joke.
Yes, great examples. A comedic character not being the smartest person in an action movie naturally shows that men aren't being portrayed as smart anymore, when this character exists in the same universe where Tony Stark was just messing around one night and accidentally created time travel. And you're also using another side character in General Hux, again, a character existing in a universe in which Snoke and Palpatine, a man, is manipulating basically everyone and is smarter than everyone. Listen, I don't particularly like the choice of making Hux a goofball, but like, it's not some commentary on men not being smart. That's deranged.
Or how about Dr. Henry Wu, the brilliant genetic engineer who made Jurassic Park possible? Except it turns out that he wasn't actually all that brilliant after all, because all he really did was piggyback off the research of Charlotte Lockwood, a far more talented and intelligent scientist who nobody had ever heard of until she was retconned into the story later.
Piggybacking off the research of someone else? Do you not understand what science is? Everyone piggybacks off of what came before them. That's how the scientific method functions. Do you think Darwin was the first person who ever thought that evolution was a thing? No, he wasn't. People like Jean-Baptiste Lamarck had formulated theories about evolution before Darwin, but he did formulate the theories of natural and sexual selection, which spearheaded evolutionary science into the mainstream. Darwin was brilliant, and his research was revolutionary. However, his research was still helped by research done before him. This take is incredibly ignorant. It's almost unfathomably stupid. The The only difference I see for this is that it's a woman who's in focus, rather than a man. If it had been a man who had been the secret previous researcher, then I genuinely believe that he wouldn't have a problem with this, which is a very concerning thought, but of course, this is just speculation. He then talks about Ghostbusters 2016, which is actually a really unique example. I haven't heard this one before, but he essentially calls Chris Hemsworth's character a male bimbo, the most tiresome of all movie cliches.
But female bimbos are great. We love a sexy woman who's dumb as hell. Yes, please. But a man? No. That's degrading.
But also, the lovable idiot isn't a new trend that appeared during the wokeification of Hollywood. No, there are so many beloved himbos throughout cinema. You're just chatting shit.
Taking the Luke Skywalker example from earlier, consider how not only does he have no wisdom or lessons of value to impart to Rey, despite his decades of experience with the Force, the dangers of the dark side and the possibility of redemption, but he actually learns things from her instead.
First of all, he absolutely does teach Rey things. First about the Force, second about the Jedi and their history, and third about his own story, all of which help Rey formulate her own answers, which is a good outcome of learning. Not being told the answers necessarily, but being given the tools to arrive at those answers yourself. Yes, Luke isn't in the best state of mind in this movie, but he still tries to teach Rey what he knows. And yeah, he also ends up learning things from her. Any good mentor can learn things from their students. That's literally the mark of a great teacher. Again, this argument has no basis to stand on. It's completely feeling based.
I'm not saying for 1 second that every male character now has to be some domineering, super confident alpha male who eats raw meat and destroys everyone around him just by looking at them. That kind of crushing conformity would be just as tedious and artistically limiting as the strong female character trope. But what I am saying is that it would be nice to see a bit of balance and variety for a change. Instead of Hollywood trying to push the unhealthy message that masculinity in all its forms is toxic, broken, and needs to change, how about showing us a range of positive male characters?
Alright, now this part completely destroys your whole argument. The only ways in which your argument in this video could be correct would be either if you were correct in your notion that all or most male characters nowadays are these dumb, hyper-emotional laughingstock, which is just plain wrong as demonstrated by a variety of different modern characters, some that you even show in the background of your video, like Jake Sully, Geralt, Steve Rogers, Timothy Cruz, and so many more. And the other way that your argument could be correct was if you were saying that you didn't want any characters other than brooding and stoic men, which would be a weird sentiment, but at least wouldn't contradict your whole video. Rather, you say that you're fine with there being a variety of different positive male characters, which there is, so boom, your issue is fixed. There was no issue to begin with. You're just making this video to whine and cry about how there aren't enough oily men for you to look at on screen anymore, and that female characters in movies have been given more agency than they used to.
Trust me, it won't kill you to acknowledge that men, just like women, can be pretty damn awesome at times. And who knows, your audience might just thank you for it too.
Pretty much all of cinema history has shown that men are pretty awesome, and we're still seeing that today. Just because there's more nuance in the media we consume now, portraying more diverse people as well as showing both men and women in both positive and negative roles, doesn't mean that men aren't still being positively portrayed like all the time. However, your problem isn't that men are never being represented positively anymore. You're just upset that it isn't the main focus of Hollywood anymore, and that white men now have to share the stage with everyone else, rather than being the sole attraction forced on everyone else. Listen, this video is dishonest. It uses fancy words and misrepresents examples to hide how shallow and lazy these arguments are, which is indicative of drinkers' content. But I also think that this kind of content sadly has negative effects on public discourse, and it's a problem that so much of the content being made for young men who are lost and haven't found themselves yet is made by people like this, who just says whatever sounds good rather than what is actually true. However, that's all I'm gonna say for now, because I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say about this topic, and I think TJ Kirk summarizes things pretty well.
Critical drinker, I'm sorry, but you f***ing suck, bro. You're not good. You don't make good videos. You just make videos that are accessible to a large demographic of really stupid people. And that's nothing to be proud of. You should in fact be ashamed for doing that.
In an upcoming video, we'll be diving further into the cracks of Will Jordan, doing more of an overview of a lot of the problematic things about the critical drinker. Again, if you disagree with this video, then leave your comments down below, or leave a dislike. I don't really care. But if you did enjoy, then consider subscribing and checking out my memberships. Thank you to my patrons, including Ben Joseph, but other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, stay safe, and peace out.